Oh, hey, I didn't see you there. Just sitting here drawing on my iPad with my mic all set up. What's that? You want to hear about my process for doing a lettering-based illustration? Yeah, I'd be happy to walk you through that process. First thing that I do is always think about the visual hierarchy, and that just means like, what's the most important part of this phrase? Like, what do I want to focus on and have be the just main star of the show? Because if you emphasize everything, then nothing is emphasized. Because the only way to emphasize something is to have something be different, have something stand out. So the phrase that I'm going to draw is things got weird. I think it is a perfect phrase to draw because it has the word weird, and weird is fun to draw because you can make it look weird. All right. And it's nice and short. I think that's a key thing when you're starting to do illustrative lettering and like lettering-based compositions. A lot of times someone will try to just illustrate a whole long sentence. It gets to be a mess. You got to deal with all these different words and fitting them together in a way that makes sense and is not fun. And when you're not having fun, you're not going to do a good job and you're not going to want to keep doing it. And you're going to get frustrated. And then you're going to hate it. And nobody wants that. So because my phrase is so short, just 3 words, we don't even really have to think about the visual hierarchy. We just know that weird is the focal point. It's the main thing. Things got weird. Without weird, there's nothing about this. Things got what? It got weird. So that's what we're going to focus on. That's going to be the start of the show. Things and got can be secondary. And at this stage, what I like to do is just play around experimenting with lettering styles for that main focal point. And this process works well for things like this, where it's sort of about one word. It may not be the best way to go if you have something that's a little bit more complicated or something that has a little bit more nuance in its meaning. But for this kind of thing, I think it's a great way to start. It's also a good warm-up to do a lettering-based illustration where you're just sort of playing around with styles and experimenting and not worrying so much about what the final illustration is going to look like. You're separating yourself from that process. You're just like, I'm going to play around with lettering and do a bunch of different styles, have fun, and then worry about the drawing after I find something that I think it maybe is looking pretty good. At least that's the goal. So I was having a good time. I did a bunch of these. The first one, I was like thinking about making the letters into characters, putting some eyeballs on the top of the W, making some weird mouths, and just being goofy, making goofy, weird little characters for the letters. The second one, I just tried playing around with mixing different lettering styles. I was thinking of like the idea of weird as in, it's not normal, it's different. So to express that idea, I thought, different letter styles, things that don't necessarily go together, things that look a little bit weird together. I did the same thing for the third one because I didn't really love how that first one looked. And I thought, this idea could be fun, could be something interesting. Let me try it again with some different style letters. I think this one's a little bit better, but not in love with it. And that's okay. That's what this process is for. And the first one on the middle row, I did some wiggly letters. I like to draw wiggly letters. I draw them a lot and they look weird. And weird is what we're trying to do here. So played around with that. The next one, I thought I would use a shape to make the lettering. So I just made this like squiggly abstract shape and then used the block letter technique to sort of chop it up and erase pieces to make the individual letter forms. That block lettering process is a lot of fun. And if you want to know more about it, check my live streams playlist because I did a live stream where I did a whole bunch of different block lettering and showed different ways you can do it. It's very versatile, very useful. Then the next one is just space lines, tucking letters in, made them kind of sharp and pointy, and I don't know why I'm doing this with my hands. The next one was also a sort of block letter technique where I used this sort of curved, weird baseline to give it sort of like a psychedelic feel. I think it looks kind of cool, but I don't think it's weird enough. For the next one, I tried to go back into what I was doing with the first one, but just really maybe push it more, make it more weird, like break the word up, and maybe the whole thing could somehow be a face. I think in my head, it was a better idea, but I had to get it on the page and realize that it's probably not going to work. So I abandoned that ship. And then for the last one, I just sort of tried a different variation of what I did with that first one, where I wanted to have the letters sort of be characters, but I just thought maybe they could be a little bit more interesting. I had the idea that the tongue could be coming out of the mouth of the R to make the R. When I drew the first R character, that like squiggly leg I drew on there, looks like a tongue-ish.
Did you just say tongue-ish?
Like a long tongue. And I was like, oh, we should maybe do one with a tongue. So that's what I did there. I'm pretty happy with this one. I think this is pretty weird, pretty crazy. I think it's going to push the limits of readability a little bit, but I think that's okay when you're doing something like this, especially when it's such a short phrase, it's just 3 words. I think it can sort of build a little bit of engagement where someone wants to figure out what it says. I don't think it should be too hard to read, but I think if you maybe look at it and you're like, what does it say? Oh, it says weird. Like that amount of time, not like, I don't know what this says. I can't figure it out. What is that? Is that a word? Oh, yes. That's what we're going for. That's what we're going for. What was I talking about again? I literally have no idea. I should mention that this process that I'm going through is the subject for my most recent Skillshare class, which is an introduction to illustrative lettering. And it just so happens that Skillshare is sponsoring this video. Hey, did you know Skillshare is the largest online community for creatives with thousands of classes on things like design, illustration, film, freelance, productivity? It's crazy. All kinds of good stuff on there. Many of the classes on Skillshare are made by people who are just at the top of their creative field. Maybe we should look into some of those filming classes so we can try to figure out how to actually use this camera properly. Some of my favorite creatives have classes on Skillshare. Some of my favorite people. You want some examples? How about my good friend Kirk Wallace, who's I'm wearing his shirt right now. He's got a couple new classes on there. Very good. Hey, what about Mary Kate McDevitt? She's got some lettering classes too. Probably better than yours, if we're being honest. What about Tom Froese? He was on one of my live streams. He's a great person as well. What about his podcast? You listen to his podcast? It's good. Oh, Andy J. Pizza. He's awesome. Let's go. Really great podcast, Creative Pep Talk. Ever heard of it? What about Jesse Ledoux? He was a big inspiration to me back in the early 2000s. He's got classes on there. I watched them. Have you seen these learning paths they got? They have handpicked classes that go in order to sort of build up on these skills. I think you should do one on video. I've got a bunch of classes on Skillshare based on simple frame-by-frame animation, some other lettering classes. My newest class, the Intro to Illustrative Lettering that I mentioned earlier, comes with a 20-plus page document filled with all kinds of lettering and typography fundamental tips, some practice grids, some lettering diagram guidelines, and just lots of fun stuff in there. I think you'll like it. The first 500 people to use my link below will get a free month trial of Skillshare. Thanks again, Skillshare, for sponsoring this video. Let's get back to the weird stuff. Now that I've settled on a style for the lettering that I want to use for weird, which will be the main focal point of my composition, I'm going to do some thumbnail sketches to just explore different ways that this composition can look. Because this is a very simple phrase with just 3 words, it's going to be a little less complicated. In my Skillshare class, I go through a whole bunch of different ways that you can do this with longer phrases based on like using shapes and just blocking in words. But the key part of doing thumbnail sketches is to keep that thumb in mind, meaning keep it small, keep it simple, experiment and try some different things. Do them quickly. If you make sketches and you look at your sketches and they look like nice drawings, you're doing it wrong. Your sketches should look like garbage. I guess what I'm trying to say is the point of the sketch is not to make a good drawing, but it's to figure out a good composition. You're not thinking about making the individual elements look good. You're thinking about the overall thing, bird's eye view, looking down on it, the whole thing. Not what, little, like I'm not spending time doing tight little drawings of a face on some of these letters. For my thumbnails, I cheated a little bit because I duplicated the sketch of weird for all my different layers because I'm working digitally and I can do that easily. Some people need to sketch on paper and I totally get that. And if that were the case, I would probably just simplify it into a rough shape to get things in there. Sometimes if I'm doing a lettering treatment that is longer than just a few words, I will just use like rectangles for my words just as placement on the page. But because this is so short and simple, I just drew the words as is. So because the weird letters sort of curve up on each side because of the W and then the D, I thought maybe I could have sort of almost like a round composition. So that's what I tried on the first one, where I put things on a little bit of an arc, then put got right in the center. I was thinking on this one that got ends up becoming a real focal point because it's framed by the top and bottom. There's a lot of space around it, and it's just too important. So on the next one, I was like, maybe I could simplify it a little bit. Maybe it could be in a speech bubble coming from one of the characters. I'm also thinking at this point that things and got both look very bold, but I'm also in the back of my mind thinking about, okay, but I can address that with color. I can have that set back a little bit because as just a line drawing here, things and got definitely stand out more than weird. So even with the color thing in mind, I was like, okay, well, maybe I can slim things down a little bit more. Maybe I can try script. I always like to do some script lettering. Tried another option with that, maybe combining the arc situation. I don't know why I'm saying maybe. I did. I tried the arc from the first one and then tried to get the things and got to fit together pretty nicely. I did like the way this one worked. I mean, now that I look at it, I think, maybe this was a better option, but I didn't go with that one. So for the next two thumbnails, I decided I wanted to semi-abandon the speech bubble. Like I wanted it to be a speech bubble, but a little bit more subtle, not just like an overt speech bubble. So I just had the letters sort of like coming out of the mouth. Sort of felt like, I don't know, almost like the R was yelling, got. But it just allowed me to sort of arc the word shape around to fill the space. I always like to kind of fit things together so they feel cohesive. It's also a good way to avoid having like weird negative spaces where that becomes a focal point. So whenever you have like things surrounding something and then nothing in that space, and you've got stuff happening everywhere else, your eye is naturally drawn to that empty space. And if there's nothing there, your whole focal point becomes nothing. And you want people to look at the thing that you made, right? And I put a little rainbow cloud guy at the bottom because I thought it balanced the composition a little bit. And then some squiggly lines. You can never go wrong with squiggly lines, is what I always say. The next step is to take one of your thumbnail sketches, blow that up a little bit bigger. I will start to revise and tighten up my sketch and do iterations and then keep going. This process is really important for me and it helps me discover new ways to work things together or new ways to do something. I feel like if I just immediately went in with my first idea and made it tight, there's so many discoveries that I would have made in the process that wouldn't be there, and I would have a not as good illustration at the end. Doesn't need to look good immediately. At least mine never looked good immediately. At this stage, I spent the majority of my refining on the word weird because it's the biggest part of the composition. And I wanted to just kind of get these characters that I made out of the letters looking right and sort of pushing that limit of readability without going too far. I like to sort of think about what makes each letter unique from other letters and make sure that I don't push too hard on that thing or use that thing to further emphasize it. For example, an R could start looking like a K if you're breaking up the top part of that a little bit. So I decided to not even have any eyes on the top of the R, even though it is a face, because I wanted to kind of make sure the top of that stayed consistent. I also made sure to keep the thickness of the tongue similar to the thickness of the spine or leg on that P so that it felt like it was overall the structure. I think if the tongue was a bit smaller, it would end up looking like a P. I think it's already on the verge there. So I think I'm going to address that with color so that it feels a little bit more cohesive, but keeping them similar in thickness. And if you just look at the overall shape and sort of squint at it and not think about the face for a second, you get the shape of the R. So once I was happy with the weird lettering and how that was all working, then I went in and tightened up and refined things in GOT because they're so tied to how the shape of the weird letters are that I wanted them to sort of fit into that space. So once I got the curves right, I wanted the things lettering to be nice and tight and match that curve. So I just drew in some guides to sort of help me draw this out and have it feel like it's matching that curve perfectly. And then when I got it close, I actually went in and used the vector brushes because the vector trimming in Fresco makes it so easy to just get that perfect curve by just Xing out what you don't want with the modifier tool. And then I just smoothed out and tightened up the GOT lettering and got the curve for that speech bubble type situation locked in there. And the tightened up sketch was ready to go. And the next step was for me to just do my tightened up line work. And at this point, my sketch is at a place where I'm not really changing anything, but I'll just smooth things out, tighten things up a little bit, and just get it ready for color. This is what the final line work looks like. It's not too different from the sketch. The sketch was already pretty tight, and this is what my work looks like. So, what were you expecting? A fully rendered 3D worm for that W? That's not me. Not how I draw things. I draw like this. So when I'm doing the line work, I will often stick with just black line work, but in this situation where I needed to separate that like speech bubble thing as a different color, I just went with gray to express that without having to think about color yet, because I'm really just focusing on the drawing here and I can get distracted when thinking about color. And then I just drew some things in white because I didn't want to like draw black outlines around like the spit saliva coming off of the R tongue, and those little squiggly lines at the top and on the side, those would be a bit much in black. I just want them to be a separate element. The next step is color. And if I'm being fully honest, sometimes color is a little bit of a nightmare for me. Sometimes it stresses me out. But for this drawing in particular, I know that I need to do certain things with color. And what I mean by that is because this weird lettering is pushed so far stylistically, I need to do something to make it feel a little bit more uniform so that it reads together as one word and not just like a bunch of weird shapes. So to do that, I'm going to try to make it a uniform color palette. And I think I have to go with like red or variations of that because we've got a weird big tongue coming out, and I think it should be a pink or red tongue because, tongue colors. Because the coloring process, especially for this one, was a noodle fest of me just changing things over and over again, I'm just going to skip to the final color solution and talk to you about why I picked these colors. I'll maybe do another video on specifically color in the future. If that's something that you would like to see, let me know in the comments and I will try to put it together. But this process was a bit messy. I did start with the red and pinkish colors for weird to sort of tie that all together, make it a little bit more cohesive. I was happy with that. And from there, I decided to go with like a blue background because red and blue are complementary colors. They really make each other pop. I wanted that red to just sort of jump off the page because weird is the focal point here. And then I tried to set got and things back a little bit with white and yellow. Still a little bold, but they're a little bit smaller. And I think because the only thing here that has that dark line work around it is the weird lettering, I think that really helps make that really pop and jump off of the page. And you may be thinking, hey, what's all this texture? Where'd that come from? Well, thank you for asking. I decided to use this texture because I was trying to find a solution for that bubble burst 3D action coming off of the got that wouldn't obscure too much the red in the letter R because I didn't want to compromise that legibility too much, but having it just be outlined looked kind of weird. So I thought if I used color that was like layered and looked printy, like a Rezo print look, I would be able to accomplish both of these things. And I think that worked out pretty well, pretty happy with that. I did this using the Retro Supply Co. Rezo brushes, which I have a couple videos about, but if you're interested in those brushes, I'll have an affiliate link below. They're some of my favorite brushes to color with because you can get some really cool effects like this. If you saw my last video, I did something similar using a bunch of the effects in Procreate to create a similar look, but it's still not the same as when you use these sort of like brushes designed to do this. And I think these Rezo brushes are amazing and just look really authentic. If you want to create your own lettering-based illustration, don't forget to check out my Skillshare class. Use the link below to get your first month for free. And I think you're going to have a good time on Skillshare. There's a lot of great stuff on there. Thank you again, Skillshare, for sponsoring this. If you're not going to go to Skillshare right now and you want to just hang out and watch some more videos, check out this playlist here where I talk about lettering some more. All right, good talk.